Welcome to Exiles, a Gospel of Mark podcast. We're coming to you from Grace Church in Erie, Pennsylvania, where we're taking what we learn about ancient truths and the person of Jesus into our everyday life. You can check out whoisgrace.com/Mark for the sermon and resources that we're using for our conversation. Thanks for joining us today for Season 3. This section of Mark the Jesus Way has officially come to an end with today's podcast recording. We've covered 3 months, and we'll be back soon for Season 4. We're just finishing up. We're going to continue a little bit here, following Jesus through Galilee as he continues his teaching and healing work while training his disciples and facing down the opposition. Hello.
Hi.
It's a familiar
Welcome back,
voice.
Danielle.
I'm so glad
We
to be
missed
back.
you.
Just decided to come for the last one.
Yeah. First, I'll just do first and last from now on.
wow.
That'll be great.
Okay. Just throw people in the middle.
Yeah, so Sarah, you almost weren't here today because you almost had jury duty.
I know.
Yeah.
I got out of it.
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of disappointed. I've had
They called you out. Like, you didn't get out of it, right?
Yes, like you go to the website and you have to see if they're actually, and it told me that I was dismissed.
You didn't make the cut.
Or they just came to an agreement or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
Deal or
Like
like they handled it and they didn't need it.
Yeah. That
But
happens a lot.
I am super disappointed because 2 of my friends, one went this week and one went last week, and it has been very active. Like jurors getting arrested. A lady fell and split her head open and got blood all over my friend. Like, it's been very intense. So I was like, what's going to happen when I go? And I've never actually been.
Okay.
What kind
I've
of
been
personality
summoned.
would you want to be
Yeah, I know.
as a
Observer.
juror?
I just want to sit and watch it all. And I started a really good book. So I was like really excited about like spending a whole day reading.
Have you two done jury duty or been exposed
No,
to it?
I'm
Oh.
Scottish.
Have you ever been summoned?
No.
No, Nicole did, and it was a murder case, and it was pretty intense.
Yeah.
Oh, so she went to trial and everything.
She was on the jury.
My thing with it was, so you get this questionnaire. Everyone gets
Yeah.
it when you get there. And you, like one example was like, if a police officer told you something, would you believe them no matter what?
Yes.
Like questions like that are like
Oh.
kind of grayscale morality questions, stuff like that. And I was filling it out and I was thinking like, they don't know me.
Yeah.
They don't know me. I could just be like, yes. Like I answered it truthfully, but
Yep.
I feel like if people knew what cases they could be on, you could like, I don't know. It's just, the whole process is interesting. Like,
And my
hey,
one friend said it was a little bit different where usually before you were never allowed to bring your phones. You couldn't bring like you can now as long as it stays
What?
in that one. Yeah. And so,
Nicole couldn't.
right?
Maybe
Well,
it
once
depends
it
on the
starts.
case.
Okay.
Oh.
once it starts, you can't, but like while you're waiting.
But I thought
Okay.
even beforehand when they were picking an interview and you weren't allowed to bring anything
weren't.
other than like a book. Even Amy, we all know Amy that works with Grace. She loves jury duty. She wants to be on every one. Did you know that? She
could definitely see
loves
that.
jury duty.
Yeah.
She was like, bring a book. You can't bring anything. And I'm like, oh, well, my 2 friends could. Like they brought all their stuff. They just had to leave it in
Leave
that
it
room.
in that holding room.
Yep.
Yeah.
When they were being interviewed. But so now it's all, and apparently another trick, and then we can move on. I'll be quiet. Another trick is when you go to jury duty, do not show up at 9:15. Show up at like 8 o'clock when the doors open, so you get a low number. Because when you walk in and you go to the juror window, they give you a number,
Okay.
and then they call 1 to 20, for example. Okay, come in, we're going to interview you. If you're at the end of it, you're waiting all day.
Oh, hot
So
tip.
if you show up early and get like number
in and
2
out.
or 1 even.
Oh, wow. That's like getting on a cruise ship.
But
Yep.
are they interviewing you at 9 o'clock?
So I don't know that. All I know is
That's the order.
the courthouse doors open at 8 a.m. and I was going to be standing in front of it.
You were ready.
I'm here. I would like to be number 1. Like get me out. Like if I want my interview over quickly, I don't want to sit all day.
Do other countries do this?
I do not know about it.
Or is it
Google
just
it.
like
They
a
may in the
democracy
UK,
thing?
but I don't ever remember
yeah.
hearing about it.
Yeah, it's such the whole thing is just such an interesting concept.
If somebody knows,
You're
let
right.
us
It's like,
know.
Let us know.
Yeah.
It's like you said, you don't know me. Like,
Well, drop
You're-
everything you're doing. Drop everything you're doing today.
'Cause
Come
it's
down
a civil duty.
and decide if you think this person did something, and then go back to work.
like you're trusting me with that.
We're not going to pay for your parking, but here's $5.
Yeah, we're not going to pay for your lunch. Right, exactly.
Yeah. Anyway.
But the
Exactly.
idea of civil duty, I
Yeah.
think, is American for sure.
Yeah.
I don't ever remember that concept growing up, or even hearing about it in school growing up. I left when I was 21.
Okay.
Yeah.
She would have heard about it by then.
I'm sure I would have.
So
Well, if anyone knows, please write us and tell us. But no, I was kind of disappointed because I really wanted to like
Aurora could tell
see
us.
it.
Yeah, she could.
But I'm happy to be here. I'd rather be here then.
You know what? You'll probably get called like 3 more times really quickly. I've noticed that happens.
Oh.
It like happens
Yeah,
to
I think so.
somebody and then,
From what I've heard.
Anyway.
Yes.
All right. So today we're talking about when Jesus is with the children, where he says to the children, you know, come. Most anyone who's been a Christian for any period of time knows this story
So cute.
of, you know, him kind of rebuking the disciples and saying you have to be like a child to inherit the kingdom, blah, blah, blah. So it made me think of, we had this thing where we talked about different kinds of theology on staff one time. And Pastor Derek talked about folk theology and how sometimes we can like see a passage and develop inferences about what's happening. And then that actually becomes what people think that the passage is about. And so it's like this folk theology, kind of like oral tradition of like, you know, and this is an example, in my opinion, this is an example of one of those, because what do most people think this passage is actually about?
Jesus with the kids.
Yeah, childlike faith and like, oh, you got to be like a kid. You got to be like a kid.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I just appreciated that Pastor Scott kind of dug into that. And
On the other side of it.
yeah, well, and there's a difference between acting like a kid
Right.
and embodying a childlike status in society.
Yeah.
Those are two very different things that Jesus could be talking about. And I agree with Scott. I think he's talking about the latter, just because of what's going on. But I thought that was interesting. Just wanted to.
Scott did a really good job. He's always so good at painting a picture, like telling a story.
Yeah, he does tell a story well.
He
Doesn't
really
he?
good.
Like you
Get your mind
really
going.
feel like you're sitting watching a screen when he talks. So, sometimes if I'm watching online, I won't watch him.
Just listen.
I'll just listen and I'll like develop because he's such a good storyteller.
You're like picturing it in your head rather than
Instead of
watching it
him
visually.
move his hands and stuff.
Yeah, that whole concept is hard for me to grasp. I feel like because I grew up with childlike faith approach.
Yeah.
But it's like embodying. Say the word again.
It was the way his actual.
His actual words.
It's not about childlike faith. It's about embodying childlike status.
That feels hard to grasp.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
Like,
I don't
what
think the
does that look
childlike
like?
faith is wrong. I think it's misplaced on this passage.
Right.
Well, it's like we're just missing the other piece of it too. Like,
Say more.
well, so I think I also grew up just thinking of it more in terms of like that sense of wonder, childlike faith, like all these things that we're talking about. Because I know sometimes in my own faith, it's like I come with my logistics or my impossibilities, everything, versus sometimes I would take that verse and think, I just need to come before him like very unhindered by these things and just this sense of belief
good.
and awe
That's
and
helpful.
wonder.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I don't think very often about also coming to him in this like weakness and like depending on him. So I personally feel when I heard it, it made me just think a lot more like, oh, actually at the same time, there is kind of that like childlike status that's happening there that I really personally haven't, considered much before.
That's helpful.
And because as we know, he's coming toward the end of things here, and Jesus is trying to get across the points to these guys. And he's not, like, I think Scott even said this, he's not talking to the children, he's talking to the parents and he's talking to the disciples. And so it's about that like upside down kingdom of God concept that he's like, I'm putting this on, but I'm assuming Jesus is thinking, if I leave and they think this is about power, significance, whatever, it's not going to go anywhere,
Yeah, I mean, and you've seen that the last couple of chapters as well. Like, he's definitely taken these moments to teach.
Yeah.
Because, he's eyeballing Jerusalem. It's on the horizon for him, for sure. Yeah. So I'm just unpacking that because it was an interesting way for him to phrase it. So it took me a minute to, like, sit in it. We used to say this back in the early days of ministry, that we were naive enough to believe that God could do anything.
Oh, yeah.
Is that kind of the concept that we're talking about here?
I think that's part of it, but the other part of it is in that society, children were thought of
Useless.
not useless, but like, well, I mean, less
Dependent.
Yeah.
dependent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Didn't offer
needy.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
But
helpful.
they also honored them. They honored them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of like prayers and things like that. But
Yeah. Well, so I think of the status, especially when the disciples ask, these questions in terms of who is greatest in the kingdom of heaven, who gets to sit beside you, things like that. And then he talks about this concept of like receiving the kingdom like a child. And it's like his whole ministry is basically pointing out it's not about power. It's not about this high position, but it's more like coming after the weak ones too, like the meek, the weak, like they will inherit the kingdom of God, which is the thing they just like can't wrap their minds around.
Yeah,
That like,
it's so countercultural.
so,
yeah.
And we have to remember, they are literally in this moment oppressed. They are being lorded over. They are being taxed. They are being persecuted. They are being just the Jewish people.
By the powerful.
Right, by the powerful.
Yeah.
So they want someone and probably are longing for an uprising.
Yeah. Freedom again.
Yeah, let's take this thing over and flip it on its head.
Yeah.
And Jesus is saying, yeah, let's take this thing over and flip it on its head. It's like when you're talking to somebody and you're not, you're not getting
We're not
it.
saying the same thing, but we're saying
But we're saying the same
No,
thing.
it's like those parables again. He's like,
Yeah.
I'm saying this, but like, do you get what I'm saying?
saying this.
Yeah.
Wink, wink. By the way, I finished The Chosen while I was away.
Oh, did you? Wow.
Yeah.
Look at you. Did you do season 4 too?
I
the
did.
new one?
Yeah.
I haven't done it yet.
Yeah. I just got it on the app.
you cry a
Actually, I
lot?
watched it on the plane.
Did you go weepy?
Is it done now? Is it?
No.
That was
Okay.
season 4 just
No,
came out?
he just rode in on the donkey.
Oh.
That's really
I'm
that's
like
really left
really
off.
curious
sorry.
on how they
Well,
handle that.
right at the beginning.
I
That's
mean,
what
you
it
know
is.
the story.
You see, at the beginning of the season, you see the
What
donkey.
happens?
Sorry, spoiler alert.
He's learning all
What
about
happens
it
to
from The
Jesus?
Chosen.
But
Season 4 has come out?
yeah, it's only on the app
And
though.
that's right.
Yeah, what happened with all that?
Some licensing
Yeah.
issue happened.
Somebody signed the wrong contract
Yeah, I think
too
some-
early.
Have we been doing this?
I lost a job. over
But
that.
were you a little weepy?
Anyway. Yeah, there were parts where there definitely were parts where I was. But similar to how Scott preaches, I feel like I don't know. It just shows very clearly different things to think about, I guess, or different things you can,
Humanizes.
Humanizes, exactly.
And I'll say the thing, sorry, this is a tangent.
No, I
Live
love
tangent.
this. Please. We've
After
missed you.
season 4, watching that, I realized, okay, the people that are like producing and writing this, they get the undertone of it.
Yep.
So like especially season 4, I was like, this is Jesus as a savvy follower. I mean, it is just showing it. It's showing like all the, and even just the way that certain reactions happen. You're like, okay, they actually understand the cultural undertones, the biblical truth behind what these things are trying to communicate. And I think so often I'm very hard on like Christian entertainment.
Yeah.
As a person, so often it's just so cheesy or bloated or like whatever.
Girl.
And this just feels very measured, very careful. There's obviously there's extra stuff in there. There's artistic stuff in there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I enjoyed it.
It's so good.
Yeah, I think at surface level, it does a really good job of just trying to place you in that world
Exactly.
at that time.
Yeah.
And, because Christians get up in arms about the extra biblical stuff and all that. But I think the extra texture is helpful just to try and place you in that world.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is not a chosen podcast.
No, it's not. It's not chosen. But if you guys need us, sponsor or whatever,
We could do it.
we'll try to get you back on Netflix or whatever. Whatever mistake happened, we'll help you. Okay, so instead of a big idea, Pastor Scott had this question.
Such a rebel.
I know. How are you? Well, he had it in 2 different ways, but I'll read it this way. How are you representing the kingdom of God to those you come in contact with? So that's a very difficult question, I feel like.
And he gave
to
like a
just,
lot of examples.
He did. And I was thinking maybe we could give examples, or we could give some like practical ideas of like how people could look at that.
I mean, I could share my journey a little bit
Yeah, sure.
with a question like that.
Yeah.
I'm just pulling up the other questions that
Yeah,
that
he
you had
said.
sent as well, because one of it just triggered. So my journey representing the kingdom of God to people with the label of pastor or lead pastor was so much easier than when I moved to Grace. And I know I've shared a little bit of that story on this podcast, but people didn't really know me. It was during COVID too, so I didn't meet some of the staff until like 6 months in person. That's crazy. Remember when Kristen Tiernan used to work here? I think it was about 6 months. I'm like, oh, hey, we've been on a million Teams calls, but I've never actually seen you physically in person. Anyway, the journey, it was like you had this label, and so that held you accountable.
Right.
Now I don't really have a label, but I've never not had a label as a Christian leader, even as a young teenage individual. I was leading, so there was a label that was assigned to me, and there was a public officer role that I held that held me accountable. And now I didn't have that, and I was just like living on L8 Road, and the people around me during COVID didn't really want to hang out with us anyway.
Right.
But it was just bizarre. I'd never had that point of reference before.
Yeah.
To like that lens to look at life through, which was just very eye-opening, and it was about a 2-year journey to kind of figure out and navigate a little bit. So anyway, I share that because I think it's helpful sometimes for people to hear
for sure.
that working in a church, sometimes it can be easier, but sometimes it can be difficult too, depending on the role that you have.
On the other side of that, from someone who isn't a pastor, I say, you're so hungry.
Guys, my stomach keeps
Yeah,
going.
you guys are hearing weird monster noises.
Just call it out.
I ate breakfast, so I don't know.
Oh, wow.
Well, she wants more.
Peanut butter on an English muffin. That should have
yum.
That
Was it like
kickstarted
melty
done the trick.
out of the
Gotta
toaster?
keep listening for it, guys.
You'll hear
Sorry.
it. Let us know how many times it happened, and we'll send you a gift card if you're right.
Keep a counter.
For somebody who does not hold, even before I started working here at Grace, I started being held accountable when people in my life started noticing how much I love Jesus. And then I recognized, first of all, I got excited. And then B, I was like, that's going to hold me accountable, because now in my world, I don't want to say label, but this person, I have this identity to them as she loves Jesus. She's in my life. And I'm like, okay. And that's where the accountability steps in.
Yeah, I think it's a really cool balance between responsibility and influence.
Absolutely.
Or influence and responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I'm kind of seeing it in a different lens too. I struggle with expectations being put on me in a way. So I feel like a lot of my experience growing up was, you're a Christian, so you should be acting this way, until it's like you're still a person. Like, you're still a person of sin. You're a person of weakness. And when that would come out, it was just like, like that doesn't align. And sometimes that would like shatter me.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, really. So even sometimes when I think of someone putting like a label on you, like, we'll just, I guess, use my role, for instance, like, okay, worship leader, the expectation could come that it's like, I don't know, like you're spirit filled, you're always joyful. And it's like, but what worship also looks like for me is unraveling, like death and surrender to self, like all these things where it's just like, okay, am I also just representing the reality of that? Or do I feel that I shouldn't kind of represent those side of things when it comes to the kingdom? Because like Jesus is very clear too, like, come, like that's always the invitation. But sometimes it's like, am I making sense as I'm saying this? So it's like, yes, I want to represent him well. And there's been times it's felt hard in the past because instantly I feel like expectations were put on me, like, well, you should look like this, do this. So when I fail to meet that expectation out of weakness and just self, everything, that's tough. Because then I'm like, oh, have I been a stumbling block to like
do this? Like, I'm not made.
I honestly think 90% of our hypocrisy problem is just that people, like Christians, don't do what you're saying. Like we tend to want to present as finished and quote unquote good, instead of in progress and making mistakes. And the important part of that, owning those mistakes, like still being in them, still being human, acknowledge and own it, apologize, whatever needs to be done. We just, I think as a people, tend to not go there.
Yeah, we forget transformation is a journey.
Right.
As if like once you have Jesus, it's like one and done. But like, and we see it in scripture. It's always a journey. Like they make mistakes, and he's like, "Come on, keep going." So then, when did we get to a point where we've kind of not channeled that?
Yeah,
a
that's
bit
so
more?
fascinating. Just because I think we're all saying similar things, but we're looking at it
Yeah.
very differently. Because that pressure that you felt was actually comfort for me.
Well, okay.
As weird as that,
Oh.
because I knew what a pastor should look like.
You could rise to it, or
Yeah.
is that what you mean? Okay.
Yeah. And obviously, I'm not perfect, so there's going to be mistakes I make along the way. But there was something to obtain, which was comforting to me. I mean, I'm an achiever and the strength finder, so maybe that makes sense from my personality. But it wasn't anxiety. It was the opposite of anxiety. It was comfort for me to go, okay, yeah, I messed up, but I know what I need to look like. I know, yeah. So anyway, that's just fascinating.
That is fascinating.
So when I didn't have that, I had no point of reference.
Right.
Like, oh, I know what a pastor should look like, but I don't really know what a Christian should look like. And sometimes they don't always look the same, to be perfectly honest.
They don't.
Yeah, how do I work out my anger in this moment? Because as a pastor, I wouldn't have yelled at you, but now I'm not a lead pastor, so can I yell at you?
Right.
Like,
Yes, Stephen.
Can
you
I
can.
look different in this moment?
yeah. No, it's fascinating for me. Fascinating.
If I had my way and could actually do this, I don't do this, and maybe someday, but I would love to represent the kingdom of God as someone who's like set apart enough and different that there's been like a change and it's worth it, but real enough to be able to do what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like actually enter in with people, let them see your struggle, let them,
Because how much more relatable are we when we're just like, because everybody is like that? Like, how much more relatable would Christians be if we actually were like, yeah, I mess up, I do this, I don't know.
Do you feel that's part of your journey though, Sarah? Because as Danielle's talking, like, I think I see that in you.
What?
Knowing you as a person. Somebody who you just talked about, meeting Jesus, people noticing change, but also being down to earth enough. Is that kind of what you're saying? Yeah. Down to earth enough where you're also relatable to people.
I try really hard not to be ashamed of the things that I do wrong because I found that it made it harder for me
That's a good word.
to follow Jesus if I'm constantly ashamed of myself.
That's great. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? But it's never perfect, but
I'm just curious, what has confession looked like in your life when you've maybe done something that didn't represent Christ well and people have been watching? Like, do you have moments where you're like, I didn't do that well?
okay. Let's say, for example, it's the first one that comes to my head. I'm out and about, I'm with friends or whatever. And let's say I swear. Oh, so bad, right? So I swear. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I'll like instantly I'll be like, I'm sorry, Jesus, my bad, watch my mouth. And I'll say it out loud around the people that I swore around.
Yeah.
Like, my bad. And I don't know if that really does anything, but I guess it's kind of my way of recognizing in that moment. Like, I know that people look at me and they go, she loves Jesus. And I just swore. And culturally, they're like, that's not something Christians do. So I recognize the moment, and then, so I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, that's like that's your
My bad.
That's your personality, big time.
Sorry.
It's very authentic.
Because I just feel like we walk that tightrope, where I think we're called to a certain standard.
For sure.
We're not going to attain that standard. So we want to be relatable to people, because if we attain the standard, we almost become untouchable. And we're all, you know what I'm saying? We're like, people can't relate to us in this world because, who Jesus wants us to be is I don't know. I'm just, I feel that tension in this world for sure.
I also try really hard to remember that, and this is so difficult, that it does matter in a certain sense how others view me, because you want, but you also want not Jesus to be betrayed. So I don't know how I'm going to say this, but I try to really fixate more on what he thinks of me, not what other people think of me. And that's kind of gotten me out of my own head. But that's that's hard. That's a lot of work. Like if you're
Yeah.
someone may not like something that I'm doing or think it's weird or whatever, and I'm like, but Jesus does. And that's what I try to remember. I don't know if that even answered your question.
Yeah. No, I'm just
It's all
fascinated.
good. It's all
I
good.
wasn't looking for a particular answer. I was
Yeah.
just curious because our lives have been different.
Same.
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yeah. Any ideas for people for how to like assess this in your own life?
Don't stop being a lead pastor.
I mean, should they probably like maybe just ask people who are closest to you? I don't know. Like, what do you see, or what do
I
you?
mean, that'd be the most vulnerable
that's
thing to
good.
do.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like accountability takes you a long way. Like just inviting trusted people into your life, knowing we all have our own blinders, but someone we trust and we know cares about us, to be able to just say, hey, this was off or this feels off,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
allow it to be spoken into your life.
Yeah. So I've been obsessing over this podcast that I listened to.
Oh.
It's an interview between Lecrae and Matt Chandler. And those are just two guys I looked up to in my Christian journey and Christian walk. So they get together, they talk, they've been friends. And Matt Chandler says something I think is really helpful in this particular situation. He says, always be prepared to have a king's table. And he unpacks that a little bit. But he said, King David, at his table, he had Joab, he had Nathan, and he had Jonathan. And each one of those people were different people in his life in particular ways. And so just as we're saying, ask people, that's it triggered. Like Joab, he says, was the individual who was with us wherever we were going. So it didn't, where you're going in your life, the decisions that you make, that person's going to be with you. Good, bad, or ugly decisions, that person's going to be with you. That's a Joab.
Cool.
He says David also had a Nathan, who was an older person who could speak wisdom into your life. And then he had a Jonathan, who was just a lover of his soul. So he didn't care about his, he didn't care about David's aspirations, what David was going to achieve, but just somebody who could say, how's your soul? How's your soul? And I think that is just so helpful. I mean, for leaders, but for anybody, to have those three types of people. And it may be the same person.
That's great.
But I thought,
That's
wow,
awesome.
that's
Just
great.
think about that.
Yeah.
That's really good. I like that a
People in my
lot.
life.
Yeah, that's great. Another pointed question. He had a lot of like really difficult questions, which is good. But I don't want us to go into a depression, so let's just pick two.
Thanks, Scott.
If someone were reading, Pastor Scott talked a little bit about God's story, the narrative of life as we know it and beyond, and how we have our own story, but it's really our story is just like almost if you see it as like a timeline, it's like
Yep.
whoop, gets like sucked up, into God's story, and like it's all telling this one great story. And if someone were reading your part of your story and God's story, what would they know about your character so far? What would they know about you?
That is a deep question.
I know.
Can we ask
Whoa,
what would we
Danny.
want them to know?
I wish they would know.
Yeah, it's like, I know.
I don't even know how to put that in words.
And maybe even let me softball it a little bit.
Okay.
It could be character. It could be experience. Like kind of the way you. It doesn't have to be deep character. The way they might see you act. The way stuff like that. And also, just if we can't answer this, it's fine. I kind of sprung it on you. But for those listening, I think this could be a potentially really good question to ask yourself on a consistent basis, and ask other people about you.
Safe space in your life.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely make sure they're safe people.
Yeah. What are people seeing this week? What are people seeing? It's really good. I think I would want.
I think want is okay. I think that's okay.
I say go for it. That's what's on your head. Just see where it takes you.
I would hope I would want people to. I'm just looking at the question again. That's why I pause. What What would they know about your character? Loyalty.
That's good. Yeah. That's good.
That's a big value in my life. I think that I wear that and I chase after that. And I think as I think about the last 15 years of my life, which is weird. I've been here almost 4.5 years, which is crazy.
Wow, that is a lot.
It's
It's a lot and not.
Yeah.
But yeah, over the last 15 years, 11 years in Wilson, 4.5 years here. Yeah, I would hope it'd be loyalty. That I wasn't definitely not perfect for sure, but I was loyal to what God called me to in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good.
All right, I'm done. Somebody else.
That was great. That was really good.
I mean, I guess I would feel similar. And so that idea of just remaining faithful. So for me, there's also this phrase of like not giving up. I feel like the journey I've been on with God the past few years is just this like journey of perseverance where it's like I feel myself surfacing. So let's just say like trust, for instance.
Oh.
It's like, okay, God, like I know you're trustworthy, but then sometimes it's like my worries, my panics, they're not really showing that like you're trustworthy. And there's days where I think to myself, like, God, how are you so patient with me? Like, why are you still here? And you're still calling me forward more. But yet when I do reflect on it, I would hope people would say like, you're still standing. Like you still haven't given up. Like you've been able to acknowledge that in and of yourself, you actually can't produce fruit and only Jesus can do it. But rather than like throwing in the towel or just getting down on yourself or ashamed at yourself, you're still getting back up off the floor one more time and being
Leaning
like,
in
okay,
more.
God, like help me
Yeah.
again. So I don't know a specific word to really encompass that, but I just feel like it's this constant like, okay, I'm still here. I'm still getting back
Feels
up.
like a
even when it's hard.
perseverance. I don't want to. I don't want to.
No, I would
Simplify it too
say
much for you,
that does feel accurate.
That's good.
Yeah, it's good.
This is actually really strange. I have a friend in my life who has literally been friends with me since 7th grade. And her and I just had a conversation because she's walked through a huge part of my life, pretty much every major event. So we had a conversation. We were talking about stuff that had happened in my 20s. So I had not even getting into detail. There's a lot of things I had been through that were horrible, like just awful. She went through it all. And she mentioned to me, we were talking about, and there was someone else that we were talking with that had never heard these stories before. And so they were, going through it. And they said, how did you even turn out the way that you are? Like the things that you had gone through or whatever. And I was like, and my first response was, well, Jesus. But Nicole turned around and she said, actually, it's her character. She has a lot of strong will. Like she wouldn't have been able to get through what she had gone through if she didn't have that. Like, so I actually was given a character the other week without, and I just thought of that when you were talking. I was like, oh, this conversation actually just happened. And that has carried me through. So that's the character that's probably gotten me to where I am now with not literally spiraling.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really
Yeah, and that doesn't diminish.
Thanks, Nicole.
It doesn't diminish what Jesus did because God gave that to you.
And he gave me that character because when I vision, I don't know how you guys envision when you look back at your life, I see it like 20s, 30s, 40s. There's like almost like a graph and there's like, it's almost like a calendar and I can see like all these events that took place.
We think similarly then.
Really?
Uh-huh.
That's cool.
And that I literally can go back and like, it's like a calendar boxes is the only way I can really think like 22, 23, to whatever. And I can see it all in my head. And I envision events and this new thing now where I'm just this little matchbox car and God's just like driving me around through the calendar.
Huh.
Oh, wow.
That's a
I
great
stop at the
visual, though.
matchbox.
He's on like a
Not being
broom.
driven around.
Segue.
But
Segue, there you go.
yeah, that's so I think about, I'm like, ooh, she's got a good point because if it wasn't for God giving me that and walking alongside me and saving my behind, I should be like locked up.
Yeah, that's wow. Okay.
You just opened a can of worms.
Yeah, wow. We'll
Now
save
we're-
that. Season 4.
Add to season
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Goodbye, everybody.
Cliffhanger.
How I made it.
How I Made It with Sarah. That'll be a great podcast.
Spiraling.
Yeah, do your own.
Yeah, that'd be
Just like
great.
Oh, wow.
story time.
We have a studio.
It's like
She really should. Write us an email if Sarah should do her own podcast.
it's kind of depressing.
Oh, the characters of Sarah. That could be.
Oh.
Imagine you could have a conversation with each one of your
You can like
characters.
post pictures.
She could
That's
have multiple
great.
mics.
Yeah.
to help
Oh,
her.
for sure. And we could put a little effect on each mic.
Yeah.
Hop around.
I would love it. I would love that. I would listen to it.
Yeah, I'd listen for sure.
You asked for it.
Okay. So the other, the way that Scott closed, I thought was really beautiful. And so this is our last episode of this podcast for a couple months.
Yep.
So I'm going to break a rule here, but
Do it.
right now, this might not play later if people listen to it later, but like right now in our society, in America, I feel like we have this, I don't know, we're in a tumultuous time politically, which also then unfortunately trickles down usually to spiritually. There's a lot of connectedness to what happens politically in America for some reason. I don't know why. It's pervasive. It's crazy. And as the election comes near, I think it's only going to get worse. And so I wanted just us to spend the last little bit of time here talking about how we, as people of God, from Grace, people who listen to this podcast, can navigate this time the way that I think Jesus would want us to. And one of the things that Pastor Scott said at the end of his sermon is to imagine if people knew that we loved them simply because God made them. And can you imagine what God could do with a church full of people like that?
Yeah, so
I was hoping you were going to go first.
I've been on this journey. I'm on this journey right now. For those that know some of my story right now, but we went on this journey with our foster son Alex, who we just call our son at this point, because he has family members who have significant issues, and there's boundaries. So this is the tension that I feel with this. Loving people who are made in the image of God simply because they're made in the image of God doesn't erase necessary boundaries.
Not at all.
But it presents a tension, and you have to ask yourself, what does that look like?
Absolutely.
And so for Alex, like, we had the privilege and opportunity to kind of navigate what does it look like to love your family because they're made in the image of God, and but still protect yourself.
Yeah, that's
because
good.
when we say we love somebody, I think it can look, and it sometimes should look, multiple different ways.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
And I think we've sometimes oversimplified love to say, hey, I love you, therefore this is what it means
supposed to tolerate
in
it.
every situation. And that's not always true. And I'm not really giving an answer more than I'm just making a statement, but I'm proud of him. He would be such a fascinating person to talk to about this, because I look at him, I'm so proud of him. He does such a wonderful job.
That's cool.
He does such a wonderful job loving his family in a way that respects them.
Yeah.
And even sometimes gives them honor, although that's
Wow.
very difficult.
Wow.
Not giving up on them,
Wow.
but also maintaining really healthy boundaries.
Boundaries,
He's figured
good.
it out more than I have.
That's amazing.
We had the privilege of at least having the conversation with him.
Well, you
but
also gave him you also had the privilege of giving him permission.
Yeah, true.
yeah.
Like that's a big
And
deal.
guidance.
And guidance, yes, on like it's okay, because a lot of us in situations like his, personally, you think you're doing the wrong thing
yeah.
by putting those boundaries in place because you think I love them, I'm supposed to forgive them, which means I'm supposed to have them in my life all the time.
Yeah.
And that's I've learned, and somebody gave me
Yeah.
permission.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal.
What I've found is that stepping towards everybody in your life with that idea first is really disarming. And I think it's a great set of starting blocks to push from. It doesn't give you all the answers, but this person hurt me, but this person's still made in the image of God. Like we can't, that's a fact that we cannot discard or throw away.
Right.
And if that is true, then what? And that's just always helped me. I don't do it perfectly. I have my own issues with people that, have hurt me or whatever. But I've always found that to be very disarming in my life, is to approach every person in your life that you come in contact with that phrase first.
That's good.
They're made in the image of God.
Yes.
Now what?
That's great.
But that doesn't answer the question.
Well, no, but you're fine. It's good.
Kind of.
I mean, it does. That's just what we're talking about.
Yeah, it definitely weaves in.
Yeah.
I mean, I think so as humans too. This is just my thought. It's like kind of going with those labels and different things. Like we see a lot of things face value, which can cloud just this person is created by God, loved by God, regardless of the list of things we attach to someone. They're still made in the image of God. So I think I'm just pondering even more based on what you're saying, like how, like, it's not like I do that well all the time. Like we can strive to do that, but that is a journey to be able to see something happening and to not immediately react based on the factors presented. It's such a journey to be able to come back, be like, okay, but they are a child of God. But now what? I think that where do we go from here is super important in that. So I'm just kind of unpacking that too with everything.
Can you read the question again?
I mean, really the question is like, how do we navigate the world in the current climate as believers, as Christians? And to Scott's point, what could God do with a church full of people that loved people well?
The cliche answer is just remember at the end of the day, Jesus wins and none of it will matter. And it's all temporary and it's not going to be this way forever. Yes, it stinks. But from a human point of view, when you look at someone who is maybe really struggling or really involved in conspiracy or political and they're angry or they're upset, my reaction from that point of view is, from a person of the church and a person of Jesus, I instantly have compassion for them because more than likely what's happening is it's coming from a place of fear.
Yeah, which we talked about. I think it was this season or the season before. Just that's a good question.
And
to
so
ask.
I try to take a step back and I almost sympathize, even though I may be annoyed or I'm like, this is wild, whatever. I try to like fixate as they just don't have the security that I do in regards to Jesus, and how do we bring that security in a way that will make an impact on somebody without making them feel judged or crazy for the way they feel or think or look at the world.
Yeah. I think it's also helpful. That person's made in the image of God.
Yep.
Their image is broken.
Yep.
I'm made in the image of God. My image is broken.
Right, absolutely.
Those breaks are in different places.
Yeah.
There may be more shrapnel in my life or their life.
They're just trying.
But I think a helpful question to ask yourself is, what do I need as a broken image bearer of God? Because they need to ask the same question, right? What did I need as a broken image bearer of God, as people were patient, loving, kind with me? And had they not been, would the pieces that are put together in my life, still broken pieces, but are the pieces that are put together, would they be put together if those people had not chosen to start that way?
Yep.
And I just think collectively we have a responsibility, one as a church, but two, I think in our society, a responsibility to realize that people were patient with us in our broken image bearing.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
And we may actually be part of helping put some of those other pieces together in people's lives too. So it's a perspective shift.
It is.
That has to take place. And what could God do? I mean, the sky's the limit, I think is the obvious answer.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're going to leave you.
We weren't too depressing.
No, it was great. So
That's good.
we've given you enough, I think, discipleship questions for today. And I just, encourage you, maybe write them down, maybe find somebody, like Stephen said, try to build that table. Find some people you can trust and talk to these things or talk about these things with. And for those of you in America, as we're going into this season, yeah, I think I just encourage you with everything that these guys said, just let's try to bring the kingdom of God forward without, doing all the things. All right. So whoisgrace.com/Mark for the resources. And again, you can submit questions. And if you submit them from this podcast, we'll probably save them for the next season. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in a couple months.
Bye, everyone.